Hello everybody, Clay here, Cardboard Empires. Today I have a video that's going to be a little bit different from videos that I've done in the past. It's going to be a response video. Starting internet drama, a beef, if you will, with Jake from Pokenomics. I watched a podcast that he'd done with two other gentlemen in which he said that modern Pokemon is uncollectible and compared it to the comic book market. Now, I'm not going to get drawn into trying to falsify a negative claim like modern is uncollectible. But what I will get drawn into doing is trying to falsify the claim that modern Pokemon collecting is like comic book collecting and can be compared to that market. I will do my best to poke holes in that and to try and prove that thesis incorrect. But before I get into the video, remember when I made a video saying that my distributor told me that Battle Styles Wave 2 was going to be delayed a month? Yeah. So let's get into why I think comparing modern Pokemon collecting with the comic book market is incorrect and incomplete. It has to do, even I guess making this claim or seeking to make this claim in the beginning has to do with trying to, the impulse, which I completely understand and engage in, to try to map other areas like history, other markets onto current markets to gain a better understanding or to make some sense out of something that seems nonsensical, like the Pokemon market right now, which just seems completely nonsensical. So I understand that impulse and I engage in it. Why I think the comic book comparison is incompatible there's several reasons. First is that the comic book characters are relatively unchanging. So the Batman from 1939 hasn't evolved much since then. There has been some evolution, but the main overall storyline, the character arc, has been relatively consistent. And that's not necessarily the case in Pokemon. We've gone through several regions. We've been introduced to hundreds of new Pokemon since then. And the story is constantly changing and evolving, which means that what was new today is going to be old tomorrow. And you can't map that onto comic books because what was new in 1939 is the same thing, I guess, as nowadays. It's new today. The movies that come out, they're still retreading the same story that has been told how many dozens of times. You can easily compare, what I like to do is compare comic book collecting with book collecting in general. And like, you wouldn't go out to Barnes and Nobles and buy a copy of Wuthering Heights and put it in a filing cabinet and expect it to gain any value. No, because there was a copy of Wuthering Heights originally. It hasn't changed any. It's just been reprinted. And that's what we have being printed nowadays. But the original copy still holds value because there's only one of those. And the Batman storyline, the character itself, is the same to me. That is to say that all the comic books made since 1939 are derivative of the original story in the original comic book that was made then. And that's what gives those old comic books value. I'd argue that the thread between old and new is much weaker in Pokemon. The storylines in the Pokemon coming out nowadays are not derivative or as much so as in comic books. You don't get to Lugia by way of Charizard. So my kids growing up today are going to love Lugia as much as I loved Venusaur. Yeah, I said Venusaur, a Chad Pokemon, Vine Whip, Razor Leaf, like real attacks. None of this fire stuff. He's got a flower on his back. He lulls you in with this beautiful flower and then whoosh, whips you with his vines. In comic books, also, why I think the modern era comic books, I don't even know if they make comic books anymore, but when I talk about modern comic books, I'm talking about like the 90s, so the kind of the second boom of comic books. It's a relatively unchanging media over time. The comic books from the 80s and 90s, the early 2000s, look, for all intents and purposes, the exact same as they did in 1939. It's like some thin newspaper leaflet with a staple in the middle. Even the way that they're printed is kind of the same, with like the dot matrix kind of printing. And yes, art styles did change over time, but comic books in and of themselves remain relatively a stable media throughout the decades. That's not necessarily the case with Pokemon cards specifically. You have all of these changes and upgrades and all this progressive thinking in the way that cards are made and the packs and the booster boxes. It makes all of this change makes things that are being produced today collectible in the future, in my opinion. You have things like foils, full arts, textures, shinies, and God knows what else they're going to come out with in the next 10 years. So again, what's new today is going to be old tomorrow. Not the case with comic books. I hope that I'm driving that point home. And one of the biggest red flags to me with comic books, or trying to compare Pokemon cards with comic books, is that comic books were the precursor to the IP that actually took off. So the storylines and the characters were fleshed out, were created, and they went through the revisions in the comic books. And then we got to the TV shows and the movies, and that's what took off. That's not necessarily the case with Pokemon. We've had the video games. I loved video games when I was a kid. I played them a lot, which are highly collectible today. We have the TV shows, but the card game has been around since the Pokemon inception, the original hype of the Pokemon, and it continues through to today. It's always been a part of the media franchise as a whole, and it hasn't been left in the dust like comic books have. When we started getting our Batman movies and our Superman and Avengers and Marvel and DC and inundated with TV shows and movies, comic books were thrown out the window. They were left behind. And that's just not the case with Pokemon. Pokemon cards are still very much a thing. There's still tournaments, there's still players, there's still collectors. And that all leads me to believe that what's old today, say it with me, what's new today is going to be old tomorrow. Another problem that I have with the comparison is that comic book collectors always had a very bad image problem. I mean, think of The Simpsons, for example. The comic book guy, nobody really wanted to be publicly tied to the image of a comic book collector. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I hate to use Jake Paul as an icon, but I will say we have a different type of dude who is less reserved, more gym bro, jockish type, tying himself to this intellectual property, which I guess it breathes some new life into the image of a Pokemon card collector. And I'm sorry, but that's going to do nothing but help overall and in the long run. Now, I want to make sure that I'm making it clear that I'm not saying that in 20 years from now, WotC is not going to have any value. Of course, it's always going to be more valuable to have WotC era cards than, let's say, Vivid Voltage. A Charizard, a base set Charizard, is always going to be more valuable than a Chonkachu from Vivid Voltage. That's just the way it is. Because in collecting, things that are more scarce are more valuable. That's supply and demand. If there's not a lot of supply of something, it's going to command a higher premium. But my problem with Jake is that he doesn't leave, in my opinion, enough of a door open to even consider what's going to be, pardon me, scarce from modern today in the future. And he doesn't, I don't think, does enough to acknowledge that modern today is going to be vintage tomorrow. There are a lot of kids that collect Pokemon boxes, and Vivid Voltage was a huge set. I believe in 10 years' time, there are going to be adults who are going to look back on the Darkness Ablaze Vivid Voltage era and want to recreate that. I could be wrong. I'm fully able to be wrong. Prove me wrong. That's fine. But this is my personal opinion. And these are the reasons why I don't think that you can compare comic books with Pokemon cards. Let me know if I'm wrong in the comments down below. I think that I've made an airtight argument here. I don't think that there's any way that you could prove me wrong. I'm right. But I'm sure if there is, somebody in the comments down below will prove me wrong. And I might reach out to Jake on Instagram. He said in his video, if you have a video that you want to talk about modern in, reach out to me on Instagram. Let me know. I might do that. I might not. We'll see. But if anybody wants to do that for me, feel free. If you are not subscribed to the channel yet, please consider doing so. Please consider hitting the like button on the video. It gives this beautiful machine the motivation that I need to keep making these videos. And this machine runs on motivation. It's like my car with unleaded gas. You just got to keep pumping in motivation and the engine just keeps firing. So thanks for watching. And as always, I will catch you later.